Great again to see you. Thanks for being here for this Bible class hour. We're studying in the book of Genesis. We're in the early chapters of Genesis. And it's just, I think, a real encouraging thing to get all of this background information. It's history, of course, but it's also great moral lessons that are contained in these early stories of man and man's interaction with God. We learn about God from how He interacted with those people. We learn from those people things to do and not to do. And so it's just, I think, a real encouraging study. We are ready to begin in chapter 13, Genesis chapter 13. And this, we're going to track here, and actually we're going to skip a couple of chapters as we get into the lesson. And what we want to do is we want to follow the history of Lot now, just for a minute, and then we'll jump back and continue with Abraham. But we're going to talk about Lot. We remember, of course, that Lot was Abraham's nephew. If you go back to chapter 11, verse 31, Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan, and they were coming to Haran and dwelt there. Now, if you go back up to verse 28, Haran had died before Terah in the land of his nativity in Ur of the Chaldees. So Lot's father had died. His name was Haran. He was Abram's brother, right? So that very clearly establishes then that Lot is nephew to Abram. It's never, I don't guess, actually specified, but it sure seems like at the death of Haran that Abram sort of took Lot under his wing. And I think we would probably use the terminology that he sort of became a father figure to Lot throughout. All right, so they travel together. They are in the land of Canaan, and they are prospering. In chapter 13 now, verse 1, Abram went up out of Egypt, he and his wife. We talked about that sort of ugly episode last week. He and his wife and all that he had with Lot, and Lot with him, into the south. That is the south part of the land of Canaan, south part of the promised land. And Abram was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold. And so Abram has prospered. He's a wealthy man. I think that's one of the things that we maybe sort of lose sight of. We view these people as sort of migrants or maybe even vagabonds. They're just moving around. They don't have any. They just live in tents. They're chasing their herds around in dry desert lands, and they don't have. That's not the right picture. Abram was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold, and so he has acquired wealth. He has prospered. Things are going well with him. Now, of course, as we remember, that generates an issue between Abram and Lot. Verse 3. Abram, went on his journeys from the south even to Bethel, and to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, and to the place of the altar which he had made there at the first. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. And Lot also, which went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents, and the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so they could not dwell together. And there was a strife between the herdmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelled then in the land. And Abram said unto Lot, Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and your herdmen, for we be brethren. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right, or if thou wilt depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. So, we remember this story very well. Here's a problem of prosperity, right? Their issue is that they have been so prosperous, and their herds have increased so much now that there is conflict or contention over probably grazing lands and water. Their herds are so great that, and of course, if you're a herdman, that's what you need, right? You need grazing land, you need water. And so they begin to contend over this. And when it's not a personal conflict between Abram and Lot. It's not like they had a falling out with each other, but their herdmen did. And of course, their herdmen are their herdmen. And so if my herdmen are fighting with your herdmen, that means you and I need to come to a resolution. And so Abram addresses it. He doesn't. I think one of the very first lessons of this is that when Abram's aware of a situation, he addresses it. He doesn't let it linger. He doesn't let it fester. He doesn't let it go from what initially may not have been horribly terrible conflict, but could become horribly terrible. There have been wars fought over grazing lands and water in the history of the world. And Abram wants to short circuit that. He wants to cut that off. As Barney used to say, he wants to nip it in the bud. He's going to he wants this to be fixed now. Tom?
Look at the situation here. They've come down through this land and the famine showed up. And both Lot and Abraham and their brothers down in Egypt. They prospered down there. Now they've come up, but famine is evidently ended and they're coming up. Well, you've done farming or grazing or anything. These lands just don't pop back into, fertile situation overnight. It takes a while. So they're looking for, places to graze their sheep and things. And so there's that contention that builds because of it just being that close to a famine ending.
Okay, so obviously the land can't support them both at this time. And I mean, that's you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure that out. We got lots of animals, and we have very limited grazing right here. We're going to have to do something. Dale?
Greg, I think a lot of times we look at just a family like ours, or us, Abraham, his wife, Lot, his wife. We look at the thinking in our minds, just a few people. This is a major. This is a bunch of people.
Yeah.
And a bunch of animals, not only cows, but goats and probably sheep.
Well,
it took a lot of people to move this.
Just to get a hint at how many people might have been involved, when we get over in the next chapter and there is a war, Abram gets his own men together to fight. And in verse 14 of chapter 14, he had 318 trained men who were warriors, who could fight. That's a big crowd. And so that's just an indication of how many. This wasn't Abraham and Lot. Maybe Abraham had a couple guys who were chasing his sheep around, and Lot did too. There were hundreds of people involved. And you get the idea there were lots of animals involved. Now, but again, I want to stress the point that Abram saw the issue and he wanted it fixed. He didn't want this to go on. He didn't want a strife to continue. And so he says in verse 8, "Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we be brethren." I don't know if you underline things in your Bible or not, but that phrase, that expression deserves to be highlighted. Abram's attitude about this is, let's don't let this go on. We're brethren. And of course, I think that concept applies in physical families. I think it applies in our spiritual family. Let there be no strife between me and thee, for we be brethren. If we're brethren, we can work this out. If you have the right attitude and if I have the right attitude, we can work this out. We be brethren. We be brethren. This is more important than whether my herds get all the water I think they should get out, or whether yours do, or whether there's enough grass here or grass. We be brethren. That's more important than what he's saying is actually making sure that we are right with one another is more important than my financial prosperity. And he's going to show here that he'd be willing to suffer his financial prosperity in order to maintain a right relationship with Lot. We be brethren. That's such an important expression, such an important concept. And so he very graciously offers Lot the choice. Verse 9, the whole land is before thee. Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right, then I will go to the left. It's been pointed out a lot of times that this was a magnanimous offer on the part of Abram. He was the older, right? He really had the right of first choice as being the patriarch in this matter. And he could have just absolutely said to Lot, go. I don't know. Maybe out west of here someplace there's a spot you can land. I don't really care. You just leave because you're causing me grief here. You just go away. He didn't do that. And he, in fact, he offered to Lot the better choice. Whatever you want, you take it and I'll go the other way. We got to get a little distance between us now so that our herds can graze and our herdsmen can be at peace. You choose which direction you want to go, and I'm going to go the other way. We'll put a little distance between us. A little distance here so there won't be strife. So he not only does he see the problem, he wants it fixed. He provides a solution. He comes up with a solution that may even be less than favorable to his position. He's willing to sacrifice for a solution, and in this case, the solution maybe we can put a little distance between us. Sometimes that's a necessary thing. You know, we think about in the New Testament when Paul and Barnabas had a contention, and the best thing for them was a little distance between us. Put a little distance here, so we're not in continual strife. And so he offers that solution. Any thoughts or comments here, Dale? Yeah. And I don't think it's like that Abraham and Lot personally, individually, had been at each other's throats. It was clearly their herdsmen, but they are their herdsmen, and therefore, since they work for me, then I'm responsible. I'm ultimately responsible, Abraham says. Lot, you're ultimately responsible for your herdsmen. They work for you. And so this is a contention between me and you because our herdsmen are, well, not because I don't think they had been at each other's throats, but Abraham took the responsibility. These are my men. I'm responsible for how they act. Tom?
Abraham was basically the custodian of Lot. By the time they would leave there, they go down to Egypt. Now, evidently, Abraham had granted Lot his quote inheritance from his father and split up and things. Because now they're basically two separate unities that are traveling together. So, when we start piecing some of the things together, we see that there's a difference. Lot, is grown and responsible now. Before, when he left, the indication was maybe he was, a young man or hadn't reached manhood yet, and the time frame from one place to the other comes up, and now he is, and he can take charge of his own things, and he can make decisions. Yeah. And sometimes, you don't really make the right decision, even though you think it might be the right decision.
Okay, Tina.
Well, I was thinking, when Abraham was asked to sacrifice his son, he said God will provide. And I was wondering if this could be one of those situations that really shows his faith in the Lord, that the Lord will provide.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it, but I think it probably does. And again, God had made promises to him that he was confident God would fulfill. And so whatever direction you go, I'll go the other because I think God's going to bless me because he promised he would, sort of thing. I think that's right. All right, Tom?
If it had gone the other way, would there have been Jerusalem, Judea, that brought up? Because really you're looking at what would have been east of Jordan at that time if Abraham had taken the others. And, history, has a thing here, God had promised him this land. Was God's providential hand in there where Lot chose, the east and Abraham blessed there.
Yeah. I mean, history is affected by choices. Some choices have a bigger impact on history than others. This may have been a big impact. What if it had gone differently? Now, importantly, question 4 in your study guide asks, what choice did Lot make, and was it a good one? Well, let's read that at verse 10. Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like unto the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves the one from the other. And Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent toward Sodom. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. There's been a lot made of, and I wonder how many, through the centuries, how many sermons have been preached about Lot's choice here. How would you characterize Lot's choice? What terminology would you use to characterize his choice? Monty?
In a lot of ways, it was a worldly choice. He was looking at what was best with him financially. He didn't really, he may not have known when he made the choice what kind of people live in Sodom. We don't know that one way or the other. But even so, he was looking at, this is a well-watered plain. My flocks is going to do really good down here. This is my best financial choice. And we see a lot of times people today are making that same kind of choice. And they'll go live someplace that doesn't have a sound church there or whatnot like that, rather than not consider their spiritual consequences, at least on equal, it really should be greater, the spiritual consequences than the physical consequences.
Okay, right. So I think Monty's right. This seemed clearly to be a choice determined by how's it going to prosper me in this world? How's it going to prosper me financially? He saw. Notice it wasn't just a random choice. He made a choice based on the fact that he lifted up his eyes and beheld the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. So I got herds. That is a good place for herds. That's where I'm going. And that seemed to be the sole basis of his determination. When we make our sole basis of determination upon this world's considerations, on financial considerations, how it may prosper me in this world, very often they can be bad choices. No, that's not to say we can't be financially prudent and make careful decisions about future finances. But if that is our exclusive basis of choice, it can be bad. Anything else you see here? Bobby?
Was it widely known that Sodom and Gomorrah were homosexual?
Well, that's the question, and I think verse 13 here exposes the fact that there was already a reputation in those places. The men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. Now, Monty made the point, and I'd have to grant his point, is that we don't know whether Lot knew that or not. You couldn't say that. But my speculation would be that this was an established reputation that these people had. That being the case, then the decision of Lot looks even worse. I mean, again, you got to be careful about stating what the Scripture doesn't say here. But I believe that there'd be fairly good reason to believe that the reputation of these cities was known. And if so, then, and if you make the assumption, I agree it's somewhat of an assumption, but if you agree to the assumption that Lot knew that when he chose, then he's really making a bad choice. James?
And even if he didn't know it personally, it seems like before you move somewhere, you make an investigation. At least that's what the Israelites did. They went and spied out the land and tried to figure out what the land was like even before they went there. You could have had that opportunity.
Yeah.
But from verse 13, it seems like it was a main fact. The problem is, you move, you get to the next chapter, even if you didn't know it then, he was living in Sodom in the next chapter. He said,
And he was still there when you couldn't find 10 righteous people in the whole city. He was still there. So it seemed like he progressed deeper into that situation rather than saying, wait a minute, made a... Yeah, exactly right. So I tell you one other word that I'm going to attach to Lot's choice that I think fits is, I think it was a selfish choice. I mean, if nothing else, he's saying, I see the prime spot and I'm going. Take care of yourself, Abram. Not like Abram had done anything for him in the past. Abraham had, as we said, taken him under his wing, so to speak, and been a father figure to him. But wait a minute, I see the well-watered plain of Jordan. See ya, Abram. That's where I'm headed. So to me, I think Abraham's actions in this episode are noble, high. They set a really high bar for interpersonal actions. Lot, on the other hand, not so much. I think his was a selfish choice. Concern is about me. What's best for me? I'm not too worried about Abram. He can take care of himself, so to speak. Joan?
I kind of look at this and where it says he pitched his tent toward Sodom. Kind of makes you think of people in the world today where they're right on that edge. Now I know that's bad, but I'm going to be as close as I can get.
Yeah, well, I think, and I think that's a point that we make about this. Again, it's based on the assumption that Lot knew what it was like there, which I think is a reasonably fair assumption, although not stated. But as James was pointing out, at first he pitched his tent toward Sodom. Later, he's living in the city. And he knows. Remember when those angels come? He knows that if they stay out in the open square at night, they'll be sexually assaulted by these evil men of Sodom. So, but he's still there. Why didn't he leave? He's still there. So it makes you think his choices are failing progressively. Dale?
I'll say, why did he take the initiative to say, hey, we're moving here, our company?
Yeah, if he didn't know what they were like, he came to know. And why didn't he get out of that situation? Tom?
When Lot was captured, we read here later, and Abram went after, he had another choice then. Did he return back to Sodom? Because evidently when these people captured him, they just didn't take the men away, they took their flocks and everything. So he lost a lot of his livelihood at that time. But he chose to return
back.
to go back.
He did go back, right?
Well, talk about why did he stay, we make excuses like that today. You know, to stay in certain places or relationships will have a negative influence on them. You know, but you can do your part to be a negative influence, but you can't change somebody unless they're willing to be changed.
Okay, I don't know if everybody could hear Tina's point, which I think is an interesting point. Again, we're speculating. We want to identify this speculation. Could it have been in Lot's mind? I'll go there, I'll make a difference. I'll go there and I'll teach these people better. I'll go there and I'll be an influence for good in that city, and maybe things can improve. We don't know any of that, but what if that was his thinking? How long you do that? How long do you, in interpersonal relationships where you think, if I stay connected, if I stay interactive with this person, I can change them for good. Some people you can't change for good. There is a judgment call to make, and I always remember the expression that Jesus used in the Sermon on the Mount, casting pearls before swine. At some point it becomes pearls before swine, and you don't do that. It's a judgment call, and everybody's judgment may be different as to how long you stay connected in a bad relationship, but at some point you make that call. Monty?
When we come to about Lot here, we need to have it with the understanding that Peter, by inspiration of the Holy Spirit, referred to Lot 3 times as being a righteous man.
Yeah.
So whatever motives we ascribe to him, we need to make sure that's tempered by the fact that God said he was righteous. Now, he was probably younger at this time and maybe didn't have the best judgment in the world, but God still said he was a righteous man.
He was a righteous man, so you have to conclude that although it was a very wicked city, Lot didn't engage in the wickedness. He remained a righteous man. But even as a righteous man, it cost him dearly. As we'll read a little later, in the end, he ended up living in a cave with his daughters. And I mean, he was basically a homeless man, lost everything, and lost his family. So even as a righteous man, making a bad choice about where he lived ended up costing him dearly. Monty?
Including the scriptures as we get on over there, that he was trying to preach to the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, because they commented, "Who made you a ruler and judge over us?" So he'd been trying to make a difference there. They wasn't really receptive to his message, but they understood that he'd been trying to make a difference, because they even think.
Good point, good observation. Dale?
Be an example for us too, though, but if we stay in a situation like that too long, it could be a very effect on our family.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's right. All right, so that's what happened, and that's the choice that was made. And I think it's interesting that in conjunction with that time frame, God restores or repeats his promises to Abraham. Look at the end of the chapter here. I'm in chapter 13 at verse 14. The Lord said unto Abram after that Lot was separated from him, "Lift up now thine eyes and look from the place where thou art northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. Arise, walk through the land in the length of it and in the breadth of it, for I will give it unto thee." And Abram removed his tent and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord. So, makes you think that, God just wanted to reassure Abram, this choice of Lot is not going to affect the promises I made to you. Your descendants will possess this land, all of it. And this development is not affecting the promises that I made to you. And he restores to him the promise, or repeats to him the promise of a nation of descendants, a great multitude of descendants, and the land promise. Now here, of course, we believe that, as we talked recently, we believe that there was a threefold promise to Abram. The third, most important of all, was the seed. Through thy seed shall all nations of the earth be blessed. That's not mentioned here, but specifically the nation of descendants and the land promise are repeated to him. Anybody? Monty?
I think it's important. I guess you consider when God tells him look to the north, south, east, and west, that includes the land where Lot's gone to.
Yeah.
So just the fact that Lot's gone there don't mean it's not Abraham's.
Yeah.
And that's what God's telling him. Lot's gone down there, that's fine, but this is still all going to be yours.
All right, I think exactly right. Anybody else? Any thoughts?
It demonstrates that faith trusts God regardless of what all the other circumstances around it is. And that's a good example of Abraham. He did not just believe God on one occasion. He believed him on every occasion that God had told him. Sometimes we say, well, I've obeyed the gospel, I've been baptized, and we trusted God at that moment. But then we may not be living our lives as though we believe in God after that. We live lives that continue to serve God. That's the reason I think Abraham is such a wonderful example. He believes God in Genesis 12, and we'll see that he continues to believe God each time that God gives him another commandment, such as circumcision, or if he tells him to go sacrifice in a certain way, or give his son. We see he does that. And I can see why the deal a lot would have been, it says in verse 10, that when he looked that way, it was even as the garden. I think of the garden of Eden.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be appealing, I suppose, to any one of us.
Yeah.
If you look that way and you say, well, that's a good place to take my animals and my family. But then later on, we see that, I think it's been mentioned already, he lingered when it comes time to come out of the city. And so you get attached to places in this world. And that's just one thing we need to remember, that in the physical realm, that we get attached to things in this world.
Remember that your choices could make you attached to something that maybe you shouldn't be attached to. Exactly right. And in conjunction with what Nick said there about Abraham and his repeated examples or demonstrations of faith in God, something that you notice here, because he does this a lot, he builds an altar to worship. Almost every place he goes and settles, he builds an altar to God. Which, again, if you're moving to a new spot and you got there's a lot of setup to do. I gotta get shelter. I gotta get all these herds and herdsmen settled in. But the thing it mentions about him when he gets to a new place, he builds an altar to God. Monty?
I think it's an example here that this carries over to the principle. I think Paul told the Corinthians, he talks about, he was condemning them because they was taking each other to the law. And he said, shouldn't you allow yourself to be defrauded? It'd be better that than to take your brother to the law. And so I think in a way that's what was Abraham's attitude here. He said, look, Lot, you pick the best place. It don't matter to me. If you pick a better place than me, it's going to be all right. Abraham was willing to take seconds rather than because of his position, having to be first. And as we talked about, we're brethren here. We should be able to get along together. And if we are defrauded in a matter, it's just stuff, and we can't take it with us. It don't really matter. I can get more stuff. What matters is that we have a proper relationship with each other.
I think you're right. You're right. Okay. All right, so as we get into chapter 14 then, Lot is in Sodom, and he gets wrapped up or becomes, I guess, the victim of a war. Chapter 14, verse 1, it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, I'm going to have trouble with these words, obviously. Arioch, king of Elazar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, the king of nations, that these made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and with Birsha, king of Gomorrah, Sinab, king of Admah, and Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, which is Zoar. Well, forgive me for mispronunciation there, but how could there be this many kings? There's kings everywhere. What do we got here? What do we call this situation? City-states. These are city-states. And so it's not like you got a big nation that has extended boundaries. In this time, you have a city and the immediate environs around the city, and you have a king. He's the king of that city-state. It's not a big state. It's just whatever territory around his city that he is able to maintain the rule over. Rule by force. I mean, this is my territory. You can live in my territory if you want to, but I'm the king. You're going to do what I tell you to. But he has a limited realm and rule. It is a situation in history we call city-state, a time of city-states. So these kings go to war with each other. Why would you do that? Gain territory, right? Gain subjects and gain territory. That's what it's all about. That's what kings do. And so they go to war. Now, as a result of that, the alliance of kings, of which the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah are a part of, they are defeated by the other alliance of kings. And so what do you do when you win? Take the spoils. Take people and stuff. You take the people as slaves. You take the stuff to enrich you. Again, that's what it's all about. That's what you do. And so when specifically the city of Sodom falls in this war and the spoils are taken, Lot and his family and his possessions are taken as spoil. If you look in, let's skip down now. We'll skip down to verse 13. Verse 11. They took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their victuals and went their way, and they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. So Lot, and clearly that would suggest Lot's family and his persons, those who were his household servants, those who worked for him. They took his goods and departed. So the word comes to Abram, verse 13. And there came one that had escaped and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre. And by the way, I think I'm right here. Isn't that the first place the word Hebrew shows up? First time we hear him. Where did that word come from? Sorry. Maybe, but I was wondering if it's also because he was at Hebron. It was the Hebrew from Hebron. Maybe. I'm not sure. I'll have to look on that meaning. But this is the first place that he is identified there, and thus his descendants will be identified that way for centuries thereafter. He dwelt in the plain of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, the brother of Aner, and these were confederate with Abram. And when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants, born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. And he divided himself against them, he and his servants by night, and smote them and pursued them unto Hobah, which is on the left hand of Damascus. And he brought back all the goods. He brought back again his brother Lot and his goods, and the women also, and the people. So, Abraham's immediate reaction when he finds out what's happened, specifically when he finds out that Lot is involved in this too, he goes after those who had spoiled the city, and he has a large contingent of his own armed men. Would that be normal, you think, for a man like Abram to have basically his own army? I think probably so. I think that would probably, we said Abram's rich. He's a rich man. As a rich man in those times, you're going to have to defend your riches, because if you don't have any defense, somebody's just going to come and take it, right? And so he has basically his own armed militia. He has his own armed men. He has trained servants, born in his house, 318 men. And so again, you get the idea, this was a necessary kind of consideration for a wealthy man like Abram in that time. He has trained warriors who serve for him, and he pursues this alliance of kings. You got to think that they probably had in a conglomerate, they probably had way more soldiers than that, and he overtakes them and defeats them, and it gets back everything they took. So not only does he have men, maybe emphasis on trained men, he has a bunch of men who can do well in warring kind of situations. So much so that they probably overtook a significantly larger army and defeated. They went a long way, by the way. If you look at a map, they went, it says there, as far as Damascus, or near Damascus at least. And so this wasn't like they just went to the other side of Murray County and had a little fight and brought everybody back. They went a long way. This is real understatement here. This is an understatement of the significant military operation that took place here. This was a big deal. But Abram defeated those who had spoiled the city of Sodom and got them back. I thought it was interesting that our author asked us to contrast Abram's attitude with that of Cain. And you know, of course, what he's talking about with Cain. Am I my brother's keeper? My brother have to take care of himself. Am I my brother's keeper? Which, on the other hand, Abram, as soon as he heard what had transpired, he got his men together and went after him. He clearly felt that he was his brother's keeper. He wanted to get Lot back. He wanted to rescue Lot. I think that would be the proper word to use there. He wanted to rescue Lot from what had happened. Now think about that. Abram might say, hey, listen, he'll have to fend for himself. He's the one who made the choice to go to Sodom. I didn't choose that. He's the one who said he wanted the well-watered plain of Jordan. Let him live with his choices. I'm not doing anything. I'm not going to dirty my hands here. Lot made his bed. He'll have to lie in it. Good. It's good enough for him, by the way. None of that. There wasn't any of that. He went after him to rescue him. Dale?
Probably because he had this office, probably have to Abraham for somebody come like these kings and try to take his stuff. So
I think he had an armed force necessarily. I think so too. Bobby?
Abraham was rich and so was Job.
Yes.
But Jesus said in one place, woe to you that are rich, for you have received your consolation.
Well, that is if you make riches your goal. Abram was rich, but serving God was his goal. And so there wouldn't be a woe on him. God actually blessed him with these riches because he put God first. Tom?
Here you have this king come down and raid this area of Sodom. Abram has looked this pathway, that he took. He sort of bypassed Abraham and he fled up to an area that was out of his territorial way. It was like he was fleeing from Abraham. Abraham, heard about it and was taking after him, chasing him. This guy was in basically retreat from him, if you look at a military aspect.
So you think maybe that the guy, that these other kings who knew that Abraham was in pursuit were potentially afraid of him? Maybe.
Indications is there. If you look at the military strategy time, they were almost like in retreat. They were going into an area that they weren't ready of. You look at city-states, all the ones they were attacked were down there in around the northern portion of the Red Sea. And at one time, these were all aligned together. It said like 13 years he had served this guy and then rebelled. And so they came down in. But when they came down, they sort of went up the Jordan to Damascus. And here, Abraham's over here, in the hill country. And he hears about it. He comes up after him, chases him from all the way to Dan, and they flee even to Damascus where he defeats them. And when he did that, he separated his people, surrounded them, and basically defeated them that far.
Okay. Again, Tom suggested there in verse 15, he divided himself against them, he and his servants by night, and smote them and pursued them. So it makes you think that Abram, there's not a lot of information there, but it makes you think that Abram was also a skilled military tactician. The way that he almost certainly had a far outnumbered army. His army was far outnumbered by the opposing army. But the way he approached this and affected the outcome makes you think Abram knew what he was doing too. That's a little bit of an insight to Abram that we might overlook. Again, I think our view, so if I'm going to picture Abraham and Sarah, they're just nomads living in tents, moving from spot to spot just as the grazing land will allow. And so they pack their few possessions on the back of a couple of camels, and they go to the next valley where they can get a little grass. And it's a pretty miserable existence. They're just eking out a livelihood. That's not the picture, is it? That is not the accurate picture of Abram. Abram was a wealthy man, and he had a lot of people who served him. Karen?
In these two chapters here, 13 and 14, I think it shows a lot about Abram's character as far as what type of man he is and how he approaches problems. He sees the potential problem with the strife, and instead of just, shrinking back, I'll wait and see what happens, he goes and he takes care of it. Same thing with when he needs to rescue Lot. He just goes in and takes care of it. And I think that makes a good pattern for a man in leadership with how to handle problems and ward off problems before they start.
I think you're right. Well, we're just out of time, and this is a good place to break because we've got something to talk about. Beginning in verse 18, we're introduced to a man called Melchizedek. That's an interesting thing, and Lord willing, we'll tackle that subject of Melchizedek in our class next week. Thanks, everybody.